Good afternoon and most welcome to H 998. I want to look at this from the Eric perspective. Eric is a well-known method of changing one's outtake on the world, so to speak. And I want to put this in context with what we learned recently from fractality, chaos, and so forth. These are things that I recognize, but also new ones could be added. There is a big chapter called emotional regulation, and that is very important for both our capacity to project intellectually, to do things. People who are successful in doing these things, training their mind, training their thinking, training their directedness, are also much more effective when it comes to abstract and complex thinking. Something that was just mentioned by Ian McGilchrist in a YouTube clip from today, was it? From today, yeah. See if I can find a link later on so I can link to that one.
Episode 7, Chapter 7, Cognitive Intelligence.
What was the name of the chapter?
Episode 7, Chapter 7. 7.
Episode 7. Okay, I'll link it. It shows that people who are more advanced in the right hemisphere are better at mathematics, whereas ordinary mathematics and simple things that we learn in school or repeat at work are the area of the left hemisphere. That could be compared to chaotic systems where lower ones are mostly repetitive and simple. And I immediately, when I heard this, I was thinking of the Yale School of Literary Criticism, where they thought real deconstruction was too complicated, so they made a mechanical device that reduces the need to think. But the thing is, it is, according to Eric, not clear if they can think, because before we train these things, we cannot think. And this is based maybe on one of the biggest research results on part of Master and his emissary. It's very, very well founded. We need to train these things, and we're not even the most intelligent are actually born with it. It needs to be trained, and for be good at thinking and leading a good life, both are rather important. Here we have the strength, and when it comes to, for instance, such a thing as vulnerability, I was too tired, it's already 5 o'clock, it's the siesta time here. It's to be vulnerable. Reducing that is very important, because every time you get a thought in your head that is cumbersome, you meet some problem that is complicated, you will reduce your intellectual effectivity. So it's very important to reduce your sårbarhet, vulnerability. And extraordinarily important is to reduce rumination and suppression. Rumination and suppression are two poles of the same thing, so to speak. Rumination is when you can't stop thinking about things, and you sort of ruminate them or regurgitating them in your mind over and over again. And this is this double thinking as well, that you first think something and then you check it out if it's a true thought, if it's a correct thought, and so forth, so forth. And that actually reminds me about making a painting. If you got the color on your brush, just put the color on the painting. And then we have these people who put a little color on, take it away, put it on again. And that is very close to this rumination and suppression. Suppression could be like trying to take things away. Both those things are going to make your mind weak, effectful, not resilient. And it won't be strong enough to do heavy math or abstract thinking. Another thing is avoidance. You try to avoid things in your life that you feel are complex, too difficult, too strange, too different, and so forth. Every time you avoid, you send a message to your intellectual organ, I can't do something. The intellectual organ as a whole don't know which thing it is. It can't tell things apart. That polarity is invented by your perceptive capacity. That means you will send a general message to your intellectual capacity, you don't work. And that message will be taken, and next time you try to think, it won't work. And I think this is in a way similar to what happened when they stopped doing siesta in northern France. What happened is, when people no longer understand to take break, when they try to enforce energy into their work, the result became less. So we need to know where we should put in work, and we also need to know where we should not put in work. It should be just. The last thing is more or less self-evident, is to practice good self-care. Do things that don't sort of put you on the spot. Don't do things that are too extreme. But still, don't do avoidance. Try to do a little extra each day. Try to do things you're not used to, because that will strengthen the intellectual capacity. This is emotional literacy. It's part of Eric. Eric doesn't care whether emotions are construct of ourselves or come from the inside. We had this discussion before. I think her name was Linda, and then some Jewish name. I forgot her name. But she said that emotions are constructs. It doesn't matter whether they're constructs or not, they're still turning up. And one very important thing is to see emotions and see what purpose they have. That is actually a very important part of emotional literacy, because we all have emotions, but we can only identify a portion of them. And that's, of course, the scale here. Very low down on the scale are people who are deemed to be emotionally illiterate. They might not even know when they are hungry or tired and such things. And then you have the very tops, and there you usually find people like chess masters, who are actually very difficult to handle. I was myself supervising a chess tournament, and I noticed the best one were very difficult. They needed water, they needed that, they needed this, they needed fresh air. Well, it's in order to take care of their very precious intellect, because that plays a huge role. And they also took good care of their exercise as well, oddly enough. Another one is something called situation bias, which is very important. We have a big tendency to have a pre-perceived bias about everything. We mentioned earlier here how we divide things into existence and emptiness beforehand. This is similar. It is like we say to ourselves what that situation or that happening is going to be before it even happened. That takes away a lot of energy to cope with the situation. So it's a problem in which order you do things. It's not the problem how you do it, because you will solve the problem the best way suited. But if you already have an interpretation of the situation, that interpretation will do damage to what you do. You need to keep an open mind. Another thing is the third one here, which is very hard to pronounce, or not pronounce, but to think of, and just accepting other people's point of view as valid. It's a very tough one, because in some cases you can't do it, in some cases you can. And I think that is one of the points that Eric, that doesn't really fit the chaotic thinking. It's way too complicated as given to as an advice, I think. Very tough question, but I would say it cannot be shortened in this way. Allowing is the next one on this list. That means that you accept yourself as you are and your capacities, especially if we think about this levelized thinking. One major thing here I often mention within yoga, and Iyengar really presses on, is santosha. That means that you are satisfied with the things you can do on your specific level. And that satisfaction, it doesn't mean that you stay on that level forever, but it means that you don't press yourself beyond your capacities, which is very important, because every time you press too much and you can't perform, that will also send a signal that the intellect is not working. And the intellect is the most sensitive thing. Muscles are not at all as sensitive. You can actually press yourself beyond what's possible. And even if you can't do it, you won't send such a clear signal. Don't ever do that again. But when it comes to the intellect, it's much more sensitive. Everyone who's lost a chess game knows that's much worse than losing a running game, because the intellect itself gets somehow hurt, whereas in a running game you can still force your body to some degree. I know it's going to put down your capabilities a bit, but not that much. Still be enough left there, whereas the intellectual power is much more sensitive to that. You will of course go stronger by time, but it's very important to be kind to yourself and understand that you are at a certain level, and also that you understand what you cannot understand yet. Because if you jump a step there, you will do what a dyslexic did. And dyslexia always starts with a sequence that is out of order. They try to read the whole letter before they can, in a good manner, sound out each sound, each letter. But they try to read emotional before before the capabilities has been established to read off each letter. That's why they usually paint a similar picture to what they've seen before, but they don't sound out the word. And that is because they press themselves too much. Could also be influenced by the school, parents, or circumstantial. It could be just an accident. You never know how these things comes up. I think a very learning-friendly environment is of the utmost importance. That teachers and your environment are very kind to you, and they see to your mistakes as a learning procedure. And this might sound as trivia, and I think it does, because we haven't understood case theory before. But now it is like understanding this goes for everyone, not just for children. It is something everyone can learn. And I know in the West we usually say that learning stops when you are like 16, 15. But in the East, as an example, learning actually escalates after you reach adulthood. They're usually more trained than the younger ones. And I remember, especially in China, who everybody was training still to at an advanced age. Tai Chi, the Chinese science, they're incredibly important. They studied the great works. Some of those works are like 2,000, 2,500 years. It was just amazing. It was actually too much. And I remember those stores where you can buy that literature. It was hand printed. You can also have copies made with a special ink where they sort of stamp the whole thing, so you could really carefully copy the whole thing. And everyone was buying that. Those shops were as popular in Sweden, where you had gambling halls to put on, buy candies and buy cigarettes and those things. These shops in China at that time, 1994, was as common as shop stores in Sweden, or gambling stores. Everybody went there. It's amazing. But of course, it is not to be nice only. It is also to evolve, because you get a lot more out of life. I think one of those reducing effects in Western world is that we think the world is the same, and therefore it cannot be any progress. But they don't see it that way, China. They say learning and the world can change, whereas we usually say only learning can change. The world is already mapped out somehow, but my knowledge of the whole thing can actually, I can't get any deeper, can't get any wider. It can actually become more countable. It could be the mass of knowing could be greater, and therefore some people, I won't name any names here, trying to study the whole encyclopedia, trying to know it by heart, because then that person would have thought he knows everything that is to know. That's a horrible way of progressing. Maybe a good training for the memory, but not a very good training for your intellect. It will actually make your intellect very dull, according to Ian McGilchrist, because once you learn one part, the rest will come rather easily. It's just a repetition and a renaming, sort of. This is much more encompassing and deepening, and you really, it would be possible, as some people told me, they relearn the great works. They read it in a different way 30 or 40 years later, after they practice every day for all that time. It's a diligence I've never seen before in my life. It was to be repeated 2 years later when I went to Japan, and then I saw even more amazing things. But it's just extraordinary. The interest for learning and expanding and deepening is just not present here. Here is a chore. Most people force themselves, and there is a good reason for that, because the outcome is meager at best. What could the outcome be learning the encyclopedia? There is no outcome. It's just tedious repetition in a bad way. And then there's another, a bit contradictory point from Eric, and it's to observe your thoughts and emotions without trying to change them. I don't know, maybe, yeah, possibly. Don't really know what that means. Somebody else have a clue? Please inform me. I don't understand. The third one, though, to be kind and compassionate to ourselves and others. I think that's a very good point. That's a good training, and I would say brute behavior is less complex than civil behavior. I don't think they are on equal scale. And I think that was the viewpoint in the East too. They said bad behavior is just the mirror view on good behavior. They are the same. It's just a logical knot or contradiction sign. This is not anything but the simple mirror reflection or Rolf Cachet. It is pure simplification nonsense. Of course, brute behavior, bad behavior is not the same thing as good behavior. That they're just contradictions. I would say good behavior is much more complex. It takes many more factors in. Then somebody will say, how can bad behavior not be more complex? Well, it just cannot, because it doesn't take the future in, doesn't take the past in, it doesn't take a projection that is complicated in. Whereas brute things are just momentarily things you do for the moment, because you can't be patient enough to wait in line, or you push somebody and you're too stressed or self-observed to say anything. So I don't think they're equal. And I think that could be a big difference between the East and the West. As at least modern West thinking says they are equal somehow. Whereas one just is a contradiction to the other. An anti-thing. Anti-good is evil. I think there is more to this. I think evil is less complexity. For instance, absolute space is a sort of simplification. It does work in some cases, but it's way too simple, actually, as we learned from Edmund Musser, who showed that to arrange a bus company, you cannot handle only three-dimensional space. It will not be enough to know which destinations are the shortest and in which turn the different buses should go. I think that was an absolutely excellent first start to understanding space. It's much more complicated than we usually think. But at some level, three-dimensionally will suit the project quite well. For instance, when I learned the map by heart when I was little, an ordinary map this size worked as well, but it would not have worked for me to circumvent the world with a ship, nor fly over it with an airplane. For that you need non-Euclidean space, because the world is spherical. So it's not so much a question about right and wrong, or true or not true. In so many cases it's a graded scale, and it needs to fit the why. Why are you doing something? What is the purpose? It seems that many times in Western culture we try to get rid of the purpose. We think purpose is something cumbersome, and if we can take it away out of mathematics, as Gould tried to do, inspired by Hilbert, and at least 350 of the most prominent mathematicians at the time in Paris. It's just such a stupid thing to ask someone to do. That would have destroyed mathematics. I always see Gödel in a way like a Don Quixote, rushing off windmills, trying to destroy them, thinking they are antique knights somehow. It's just a crazy project, but it turned out to be something good in the end, although it crushed Gödel and Hilbert for that sake. Of course, it's a price to be paid for being deluded, which is rather shockingly. It's in some ways, reality is a bit hard. And then we have 4 or 5 other things here. Some of those are actually quite good. To tune into your mind and body, that's too general to be good advice. To remain present in each moment. No, Alex, of course, if you can, yeah, please do it. To focus your attention, yeah, the question is how do you do it? And this is, we actually gone through. One way of focus your attention is to have this strange attractor and repeat it, and I remember now I forgot it, so it was good in some way. Otherwise, the messages from Eric are just way too general. I will put in a link to Eric and Ian McGilchrist later on. This is rather better. This is the 5th one, and it has to do with tolerating discomfort. I mentioned before, a chaotic system is dependent on adversities and differences. And nothing can be more different than other people. Nothing can be more different than other things like pain and hassle and stuff. We shouldn't press us too hard though. But in the beginning, before our chaotic system go for the lower level, things will feel discomfortable. Things that later will not be any discomfort at all. And this I actually remember from childhood. I remember how I struggled in mathematics, as we all did as young children. And when I was a young pupil, I think it took until the 3rd grade, it was a huge discomfort. And I remember sweating and all. And it went within a couple of months from being discomfortable to being okay. And then it became joyous. So the things can change. It felt like I went up a chaotic level. And in this higher chaotic level, a little bit like I mentioned before, that thinking multi-level, having different levels, can actually be something at a lower level, even if that thinking is your own and you need that thinking. That could actually be discomfortable, impossible for your system to bear. Maybe almost like an autoimmune system disease, where you your body reacts to your own body. On a higher level, you can have different levels. And I also felt on a high level, mathematics was enjoyable. I need to go to that higher level. Before that, it won't be. And I also understood it could have stuck there. It could have been uncomfortable for the rest of my life. There is no necessary development. Be happy if you get one, but it's not necessary. And I think in many areas you can have a development and you can be absolutely successful. But some areas can just be harder and should be avoided. That's also a tough thing to know. I don't know. To resist an urge to engage in unhelpful behaviors, that goes without saying, I would say. Here maybe it's a good point to use distraction and self-comfort strategies to get through difficult situations. I would say that's very important, and that's also part of Niyama and Yama yoga, the two first branches of the Ashtanga. Niyama, Yama, it's about that. And it's about giving oneself credit for the things you've done. It's very important to stop and say, I've done this, I should be happy, I am happy. And giving rewards to yourself. It sounds silly, but it really works. After some work, remember the siesta, should be a break. In the end, you will learn to appreciate the break, and you will long for it. But you will also long for work in a much stronger way after the siesta, after the rest. You will learn the system, when to put in energy, when to do the blows, because we are creatures of either explosion or calmness. We need to know when to put in the effort, and this goes especially when it goes to intellectual training. So you need to train for a while, and if you're going to train really hard math problems, it should be no longer than 20 minutes. Now you should take a rest. And if you continue after that, you will tire the system and you can never ever get back in the same way. So tell the system it's going to be a break, the pain you feel will cease soon. And this is exactly the experiment, really nice experiment they made in the 60s in the United States, the so-called marshmallow experiment, where they asked children, do you want a marshmallow? And they offered them the marshmallow, and then they told them, if you wait for 2 minutes, you will get another one. You can have them both. And it was already by the age of 4, 30% of the kids who could actually resist the urge. And that takes a lot of the Eric things into calculation. Resist the urge, resist the pain it is to wait for something you really want and you have in front of you, but also to comfort yourself and give you a reward when it's due, afterwards. But if you take it directly, not only will you reduce the pleasure, you will not get the reward either. So people who want to have instant reward are proven to have much lower grades of satisfaction. They have lower levels of cortisol and other things that make them happy. They kill off the happy gene, so to speak. And this is also something Ian McGilchrist mentioned. Most of the people who are obsessed by taking things directly are left hemisphere. Almost all alcoholics, for instance, are left hemisphere, because they don't know enjoyment. To get enjoyment directly is no enjoyment at all. Then it's like you despise the joyous thing in our lives. It needs to be devoured in a specific point of view, in a specific circumstance, so you can focus your whole organism on that enjoyment, and that would be a good reward. But getting directly to it, that's neglecting all joy. That is saying to the system, I don't want joy, I don't want happiness, because it's a two-way process. Decision making, I know this is going to be a tough one. I didn't read this so far. To remain focused on goals despite strong emotions. Yeah, it could be good, but it's too general of an advice. To implement a considered plan to solve a problem. Very important, I'd say. In that you can see the strange attraction at work again. The plan is the strange attractor and the problem is the chaotic system. The plan is the thing, the eye of the storm, which everything circles around. And the idea of a plan being a stepwise thing, I really need to, I think this should be the last message for today because it's so important. To think of a plan as a stepwise thing, where you can skip one and you go from one to next like this, a scenario, it's absolutely wrong. It's been proven over and over again. That will never ever lead to a successful plan. What you need to do is you decide in advance and you just perform it. Then you make a strong, strange attractor. This doesn't work, it's completely useless. And this is also a modern thing. I really like Wars in Gallica by Julius Caesar. He said his opponent, Vercingetorix, the Gallic leader, he did this once. He did it only once, and he said, I beat him on the finger.
What do you mean?
Vercingetorix.
Yes, but what do you mean with that?
This is a stepwise idea of a plan, that you do it in 1 second and you can skip one. You see a scenario in front of you and you plan it like that. No.
How do you know he made it like that?
He wrote it down in his memoirs.
Yes, Caesar did.
Yeah.
But how?
Yeah, he wrote it down in the memoirs. No, who can actually spot it because he didn't go out forcefully, Vercingetorix. He did it in 3 parts. First his artillery, then his cavalry, and then his footmen. And that's a useless way of doing it. He performed a stepwise plan. It should be in one go, the whole thing. But Vercingetorix was known for that. He was actually scholar by a Greek, and I think that was the reason. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, he was actually. He was scholar by a Greek. There were actually Greek people in southern Gaul that helped the Celts to resist Julius Caesar and others, of course. And sometimes I've been thinking to myself when I read his memoirs and other things from that time, those were not the best advisors because the Greek had lost all the wars the last 200 years. And they were just usually just complaining by the agora. A few details to go through. To know your personal values, goals and strengths, I think that's self-evident. To be aware of what motivates you, I think that's a very good thing to do, but it's very hard. It's not enough information here to understand how you can do it. To know who you are and how you want to live your life. Now it's just too general, it's too vague. But still good. Most of the Eric do fit with the chaotic system. I think I want to add something to Eric, and that's the thing from James Clear. He said, a very good way and a very good starting way is to motivate you with rewards. Not only rewards like the marshmallow, but rewards that you actually succeed in what you do. For instance, what was that example? It was the British cycling team who won for the first time in 130 years or something like that. But you can even press that one step further, and that step further is that you motivate everything from your own perspective. Thereby you make your motivation autonomous from the surrounding goals and rewards. So in the face of terror or failure, you won't lose your stamina. It will become much stronger if you self-motivate. Self-motivate in that you do things that are your personality. That's you. This is you personally. And that is even stronger than the motivation of winning the game. And of course, don't think like a logocentric or a classical logician. Of course, you do both at the same time. You both win the game and your personal motivation, but you start with your personal motivation. I think that's enough for today. So thank you very much. Don't forget, you can always change. This is what the chaotic system says. Actually, there's even a strange attractor to remain the same, and that takes a lot of energy to remain the same. And that, I think that could be the best memory thing to have. It takes a lot of energy to repeat things. It is not as easy as we are used to think it is. it is very strenuous to do the same thing every day. So do change. Thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon.
Thank you.